so thrilled to host you, Lori. I'm so excited to hear what you're going to share with us about handling difficult conversations.
Well, fantastic. And so I thought what I'd do is start by sharing a little bit of my story and why this topic means so much to me. And I hope I'll be able to share a few tips. And it's a small group, so feel free to interject or ask questions as we go along. We may have time at the end for more questions as well. But my career actually started with getting a degree from Central Washington University. I was just thrilled to be able to get a degree in accounting at the time. I was not a student coming right out of high school and going into college. And instead, I was in my 20s and went to the Central Extended Degree Program. And it was just an amazing opportunity for me to get that foundational education. And, when I look back now after, okay, let's be honest, decades since I went through the program in, the 80s, all right? But when I went through that program, it really was just the starting point for what I now see and actually coach around in terms of equally important learning of so-called soft skills like communication, which for most of us end up being learned on the job by trial and error. And so, today I'm a business coach and in many ways a life coach for business owners. And I get to this place because I ran a business for over 20 years and was thankfully able to sell that company back in 2013. And one of the lessons learned that was so huge following the sale of the company was the realization that so much of what made that process both exciting and almost, in hindsight, not traumatizing, but really challenging was how poor the communication really was between myself and my partners, how challenging the communication was with the firm that was actually acquiring my company, and recognizing that over a career of, more than 30 years, the most challenging moments all were rooted in really just poor communication. And so it's like the idea that difficult conversations are inevitable. I really hope that some of what I share today is going to dispel that thinking, or that, maybe even a myth that it's inevitable. It can be to some degree, but I really, really believe that we have so much choice when it comes to mastering our own abilities to really communicate, I'll say like a boss, no matter what role you're in, because it becomes a choice in terms of how you show up. And my kind of other takeaway from that experience of selling my company was that there was this thread that ran through the great moments and the difficult moments. And that is that the thread that relationships matter. And trust is at the heart of great relationships, even in the workplace, while you're working remote and in the middle of a pandemic. So it's kind of like thinking about this one conversation at a time. You are building trust, or you're taking away trust, or somewhere in the middle, but you are building relationship. It's a matter of what's the quality of that relationship. And the more you make a conscious choice and effort to master this skill of being able to communicate in a way that's effective and develops or maintains or cultivates great relationship, it will serve you well in every area of your life. And with intentional practice comes mastery of this kind of communication, and it will minimize the need for these difficult conversations. So with that, let's slide forward. This is one of my favorite quotes. I know that you believe you understand what you think I said, but I'm not sure you realize that what you heard is not what I meant. It's kind of mind-bending in many ways. And it's so powerful because it just sums it up perfectly, that just because we've communicated, we've said something, doesn't mean that we've created understanding, whether you're communicating with a group or whether you're communicating one-on-one with another person. And so I'm curious, we've got a small group here. If you were to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you in your ability to communicate effectively, ensuring understanding? So whether you want to just unmute and shout your number out or put it in the chat, but I'd love to hear kind of where you see yourself right now. Fantastic. So we've got kind of a mix there. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. Let's move forward to the next slide here. And one more, we can move forward one more slide. So here's kind of the roadmap for today. One is we're going to dive a little bit more into this whole idea of communication not always equaling understanding. The second area that we're going to focus on is this whole idea of unmet expectations. I'm a big believer in the, I'm just going to say the reality that unmet expectations are at the root of pretty much all difficult conversations. I'm also going to share 5 steps and 3 tips for effective engagement, which is, again, so important for handling any kind of conversation, but in particular, difficult conversations. And then we'll wrap it up with a challenge. I'll challenge each of you to name and claim a tool, if you will, or a tip that you'll take away from today and practice. So let's move forward. You can keep going because I think that animation, there we go. So, posing the question again, are we really communicating? And it's realizing that having good intentions is not enough. One of the key things I want everybody to be thinking about is the intentions you have behind your communication versus the actual impact of your communication. So intentions are what you want to make happen or accomplish. The impact is how it's received. And it's I'll put it this way, it's kind of in the eyes and from the ears of the person that you're in communication with. So it's the quality of the experience from their perspective. And, kind of the challenge in this is that it really requires self-awareness. So the more self-aware you are of what your intentions are and your desired impact, the greater you are going to be able to monitor yourself, monitor the other person, so that you have some confidence that you've actually aligned your intention with the impact. And a critical result is that when you're able to do this, you build trust. And so, the other thing I also wanted to just touch on with this is the experience of a lot of people, especially in the workplace, is expedient communication is kind of what drives things. I know that like Julie, who's participating today, works in a very busy investment management business. And in those kinds of environments, oftentimes expedient can be necessary because something's happening. And you just need to get somebody working on responding to a client or taking care of whatever it is that's going on. But when an expedient style or approach to communication is the only tool in your tool belt, that's when you can truly detract from trust. You can detract from creating real understanding with people. So it's important to just think about, am I always rushed when I'm communicating, or do I even pause for a beat to make sure that I'm paying attention to how my style and my way of communicating is being received? The other thing too is, I think I said this at the top of the conversation, is that unmet expectations are, or actually, let's move to the next slide. Thank you. So here's another quote I wanted to share with you all. A lack of communication breeds assumptions of what the other is thinking or feeling, and assumptions are more often than not incorrect. So this is kind of that underpinning, if you will, for a lot of difficult conversations. Somebody's expectations or assumptions have not been met. And so even if it wasn't your intention to create that kind of scenario, if we have a habit of communicating in an expedient way, oftentimes we're going to miss the fact that we're entering a conversation, making assumptions about the other person that have not been spoken or surfaced in some way, or that we enter a situation or relationship with expectations that have not been spoken or surfaced in some way. And this can truly be the number one obstacle to cultivating what are very necessary in workplaces and in all relationships. It's a high trust relationship. So something to think about is that effective conversations feel good and they result in shared understanding or shared meaning. And I always like to think of this in terms of win-win, that you're entering a conversation with an intention that you and the other person are going to both have a good outcome. You want something that's good for both of you, and it's not one-sided. So again, intentions are aligned with impact. The other thing too that I'll share real quick before we get too far into this is that your number one clue to when it's kind of like your number one clue to when there is going to be a difficult conversation, or a difficult conversation is resulting from an unmet expectation or a unvoiced assumption, is your feelings. And when you're feeling frustration, disappointment, and maybe worst case, actual anger, then it's almost certainly rooted in a thought that you had about how things, I'll do air quotes, should be, what they should have done, what they should have said. And oftentimes they will not have known that that's what you thought they should have said or they should have done. So let's move forward to the next slide. So we're going to get into these 5 steps, and we'll wrap with the 3 tips for effective engagement. The framework that I use is known as conversational intelligence, and it's something that is so powerful. A lot of people are familiar with the idea of IQ, so it's about your intellect. People are familiar with emotional intelligence. Well, this is kind of it's not really an offshoot of emotional intelligence, but EQ is a big part of what I call CIQ, which is conversational intelligence. And it really is a big driver of the quality of the culture in an organization, or for that matter, in a family or any kind of group that you might belong to. And so the quality of the culture depends on the quality of relationships, which depend on the quality of conversations. And so this is kind of the, again, a framework that I use for thinking about how to approach difficult conversations. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So with this, I'm going to just take kind of a quick deeper dive into what really underlies the quality of our conversations. And it's all related to this first step, which is mastering your mindset and your emotions, your emotional state. And, you know, this image has a lot going on in there, but what I want to call your attention to is the red arrow on the left and the green arrow on the right. That red arrow is I, it's like I, me, and the green arrow is we. The back of our brain is where the kind of that the stress, I'll call it the stress center of our brain. And this is really the neuroscience that underpins conversational intelligence and really everything about creating effective relationship, trusting relationships, and effective conversations. It's so when we are either anticipating a stressful situation or we have in fact entered a stressful situation or conversation, that fight or flight part of our brain gets triggered. And so that's the stress hormones like cortisol. And you could see underneath the red eye, there's things like, or our responses can include things like excluding, limiting, withholding. Some people get very almost bossy, I guess, kind of dictating and criticizing. And really, that's that part of the brain where we experience that fight, flight, freeze, or appease response. And that happens whether it's real danger or imagined danger. And especially for those of you who will be entering a business career when you get out of school, those first few work opportunities where you're not feeling as comfortable and you're finding your way in your career, it can be pretty overwhelming, and we can be more vulnerable to experiencing that triggered stress response. And when we're able to kind of, understand what our own triggered stress response feels like, almost like sounds like, what are the thoughts that you have in your own mind, the more you can bring that mindfulness to, kind of where you are. And I would say to cultivate some empathy for where the other person might be as well. So the key takeaway from this first step is really be intentional about how you want to feel, how you want the other person to feel, and what is your most desired outcome when you're entering into this difficult conversation. And let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide. When I think about mindset mastery, what I want you to think about are just the images on the right side of the slide there. It's just thinking about how the process that's going on in our own minds does operate sequentially. So our beliefs are what lead to our thoughts, attitudes, values, which create an emotional response in us, which determines the kind of language we use when we're talking to ourselves. So in our own self-talk. And it also drives our behavior, our actions, which ultimately impacts the kind of results that you experience. In the book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, they share this idea that, not only do our thoughts equal our results, but that the more you understand how your emotions ripple outward, the better equipped you'll be to choose the type of ripples that you want to create. And I'd like to bring focus to this because oftentimes we're not aware, because the thoughts in our heads, it's a part of being human. We all have chatter going on in our brains all the time. It's, again, just part of being human. And yet we are usually very aware of what we're feeling, whether that's physically in our body or just, however you experience that emotional awareness. Let's move forward to the next slide. And on this slide, I've got this emotional scale. This is something that you can actually Google. If you just Google emotional scale, you'll see all kinds of images for this. But the reason why I like to share this is because it really supports this idea of where it's just the full range of emotions that we can experience. And if I were to go back to that image of the brain and where the stress response is in the back of our brains versus the executive or prefrontal cortex, so that executive part of your brain literally gets turned off. It's not going to function when you're triggered. It's not going to allow you to think clearly because you will be in your head. It's so when you learn to kind of recognize this, how you personally experience the scale of emotions, it can really help with starting to kind of master your own internal state and your own internal mindset. And it is a big part of the second step, which is to be mindful of emotional safety. So even if you have become calm and you're feeling, I always like to say, kind of even in a neutral state as you enter a difficult conversation, it's difficult. Well, sometimes it's difficult to predict what the other person is experiencing. So it is so important to be mindful of how they are feeling, and being able to recognize the signs when somebody is maybe triggered themselves or feeling anxious. So kind of to recap there, it's like it's managing your own internal state, so your own stress response, so that you feel more neutral and more open and calm. So you calming the water, so to speak, will help the other person to feel this sense of emotional safety. And so if you're anticipating a conversation being difficult, it's entering that, if it's a conference room or wherever you might be having that conversation, it's taking a few deep breaths so that you literally calm your own nervous system. And you being a human, you feeling calmer, you are not going to be creating those choppy ripples in the water when you sit down to talk with somebody. The other thing that's really key in terms of creating emotional safety for yourself and the other person is it's really having a commitment to being candid and kind. And candid does not have to mean conflict. Conflict often comes, or a perception of conflict often comes from entering a conversation with kind of a fixed idea that is more either judgmental against the other person, or anticipating or assuming or having expectations about what's going to happen when you don't really know. And so it's about not being open. And so the more you have that commitment to being candid and kind, open to hearing the other person, you can create, again, that sense of emotional safety. The other kind of key thing to create emotional safety for yourself and the other person is to be clear and remain focused on what is your desired outcome for this conversation, and keep coming back to that, checking yourself against that, checking at least your perception of how the other person is experiencing the conversation, what you observe in them. Do they sound or look agitated? That kind of thing. But it's just being clear on what you want your desired outcome for this conversation to be. With your own internal state calm and that feeling of being prepared, you're a good partner in diffusing any kind of negative feelings or energy that person may be experiencing. So I want to just kind of put out here a couple of scenarios too. So if you look at the bottom of the scale that's in black, where it talks about just a sense of powerlessness. Imagine if you're feeling powerless, what behaviors or actions are likely to happen? For many people at this end of the spectrum, this is where they can behave and communicate in a defensive way. There can be a lot of this energy of being self-protection, or people can be stuck. They don't take action. They don't say anything. One of the things that I always find pretty fascinating when you think about that fight or flight response, people are familiar with the fight, flight, or freeze, but a lot of people aren't as familiar with the idea of appease. So that's, I don't know that you can say one is worse than the others, but in so many ways, women are more likely to appease, which is it's not good for you. And if you have a pattern over time of just appeasing other people, that's a win at their it's their win at your expense, is the way I'll put that. And so it's recognizing that there could be very real consequences when we stay in these kind of more negative emotional states for a period of time. On the other end of the spectrum, there's positive expectation or enthusiasm. So you can just imagine if you have more positive expectations of a person or a situation, you're going to feel better, and chances are they're going to feel better, and any behaviors that flow from that are going to be more productive. So let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So I'm going to ask you to imagine again, if at the point of interaction, you were to take a sip of the cocktail on the left versus a sip of the cocktail on the right. Because really, it's very much like what happens to us physically when we are triggered by stress. It's kind of like you're flooding your body and your brain with these negative hormones and stress hormones. And so you will feel, you're either going to feel upset, you could feel defensive, worried, anxious, all of that, just not awesome. And so, and it's just remembering again that it goes both ways. So just imagine the difference in both how you feel and your ability to achieve your desired results if you're both sipping from that green cocktail on the right, where it's more upbeat. Those hormones like oxytocin, those are the feel-good hormones. And people feel that when we're feeling that way, others feel that. And so there is a healthier energetic exchange is the way I look at that. And, you know, I'll just say the green one's going to taste and feel a lot better. Let's move to the next slide. So step number 3 comes back to the beware of unspoken expectations and assumptions. It's enter these difficult conversations with a curious mindset, ask questions, listen, and speak. This is where kind of that candid and kind comes into place. It's being willing to interact in a way so that you can establish fact versus story. So the stories that you may be, and the stories in your own mind about what's really happening, which another way to put that is, what are your interpretations about what you're hearing or seeing? And oftentimes, in fact, most of the time, the only way to really sort out what's true with a capital T is to listen and ask clarifying questions. I like to share this. It's called the Conversational Intelligence Dashboard. And it's something that if you're interested in getting a copy of this, I'm happy to email you. It's an image that you can print out or save for yourself. But when you think about where you enter a conversation, where are you in terms of mindset and your emotional state? Are you on the protect side of this gauge, or are you on the partner side of this gauge? The protect is the I, partner's the we. And a clue is whether you are listening to connect with the other person, to really hear what they're communicating, or whether you're listening to confirm what you already think or believe. Or oftentimes we listen more with just because we've got these assumptions about what's right or wrong, we're listening more to reject what the other person is going to say. And so if you are not the person in a power position, it may feel more daunting to think about how you would enter these kinds of conversations. But this is where, again, it's like knowing how you want to show up and recognizing that if you're in protect mode, they're going to feel it. And you're not going to hear necessarily what it is that they're really saying. So it's having the courage to check the assumptions that you are making or the expectations that you have, to check with the other person, to say them out loud. Here's what, I know that we've got the situation that we're dealing with, and here's what I'm thinking and feeling about it. And I don't know if that's correct or not. And I really want to know what you're thinking. And it's just being open to saying out loud what may actually be very loud in your own mind, but we need to get it out actually so the other person can hear, and you can have real conversation around what you're thinking, what they're thinking, and see if we can't get our worldviews, so to speak, to align on whatever the situation is. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So the fourth step is to close with shared understanding. So again, kind of back to that idea of ask clarifying questions, confirm with each other what the next steps will be. And really important, and something that I see with pretty much every client I work with now, the missing piece is almost always this, or the missing step for most people, is there is so much telling instead of listening. And a lot of times these, especially difficult conversations, can be one-sided. And so a lot of my coaching ends up being around, how do you close a difficult conversation so that you feel confident that you actually have shared understanding with this other person. And it does require getting out of your comfort zone. If this is not something, or if just the idea of having a more difficult conversation has you kind of gets that stress trigger going for you, then it does take courage, and it does take getting out of your comfort zone to ask questions. And if you are the person who, again, is not in a power position, it's having the courage to even ask something like, can I ask a question? It may sound tentative, and yet if you keep it inside and you walk out of the conference room or out of the conversation and you did not voice what you're unsure of, or maybe it's something that you actually know that would impact the situation that they don't know. If you walk out of the room with all of that inside, there's such a great possibility that it just sets you up for greater distress and stress down the road, because chances are problems will continue. Whatever it was that caused that difficult or created the need for that difficult conversation is probably not going to be resolved. So it's having the courage to ask those clarifying conversations, even if the other person is your boss or somebody in a position of power and it feels uncomfortable. With practice, it gets easier. And again, the more you've kind of managed your own, mindset and your emotional state, it definitely becomes easier. Let's see here. Oh, the other thing I was just going to say about this is that so often what I see is, and most of my clients are firm leaders, they may be CEOs or partners, that kind of thing. And if you're not in the position of power, just know that for a lot of leaders and business owners, they are not comfortable having these difficult conversations either. And so it's recognizing that they may also want to rush through these kind of conversations because they want to get it over with. And so the more you can be that calm presence and ask for that time to clarify your own understanding, and recognizing that it's not enough to have just, again, air quotes, a good talk. it's important to know what are our next steps. What does accountability need to be in terms of executing whatever the next steps are? What's my part? What's your part? Here's what I need in order for this to happen. But it's getting everything out there so that nobody's walking away with unspoken assumptions or expectations. So let's move to the next slide. Actually, can you go back one? Oh no, actually, this is good. Sorry. Yeah, go forward to this. So the fifth step is what I call a circle back conversation. And in particular, if the scenario or the situation that you're dealing with, if the situation is critical or that relationship is really critical, whether it's to you personally or for your career, commit, even again, if you are not in a position of power, commit to getting on the calendar a circle back conversation to check in. This is when you will share your perception of how it's going, and it'll be an opportunity for them to do the same. So it's more about feedback. This is how I see things. How about you? You know, it's just that simple. And it's a time too where and you want to do a circle back. You don't want to wait 6 months. You want to do it. You want to give yourself enough time for some actions to have happened, but not so long that, you know, it just kind of fades away, not resolved, but kind of fades away. So this is going to be, you know, maybe it's 4 weeks, 6 weeks, but it's that opportunity to decide together, do we need to pivot in any way? Or are there any new next steps that need to come into play? And this is the kind of thing too, that with consistent practice and commitment, your trust in each other will grow. And it's not something that is a natural skill for most people. And a lot of leaders, I think, struggle with I'll say their own time management. So it's another place for you to just really be committed to the quality of the relationship, the quality of the communication, and building trust, so that everybody can be more successful and feel better, feel more successful. That's one of the key things that I always keep in mind in working with my clients, is that, hey, you deserve to enjoy the journey too, not just kind of ring the bell for bringing in more sales or doing whatever it is that you're in this job for. But if our relationships are strong, if the rapport is good and there's trust, you will enjoy the ride a lot more, I promise. So let's now, let's move forward a slide, and we'll do a quick run through on these 3 tips for, and actually, since we got kind of a late start, maybe before I go into these 3 tips, any thoughts, any questions anybody would like to share? Because I think we've got enough time, just whether it's about the 5 steps or anything that's been shared so far.
Well, I really appreciate, Lori, how you brought in the neuroscience behind thoughts and feelings. And I apologize, friends, if there's any audio interference on my end. A book that was really important to me, specifically for anxiety, but that I know has affected my conversational intelligence, is entitled How Emotions Are Made. And I believe, I should have written it down beforehand, but I believe the author's name is Lisa Feldman Barrett. I believe she works out of Harvard. And she just talks about that. And I think there's kind of this interesting tension that we have culturally, where we really support each other and reinforce that your emotions are valid, which is absolutely true. But then the more we practice mindfulness, the more we discover that, well, your emotions are often a result of your thoughts, and your thoughts, not that they aren't valid, but maybe they aren't true, right? Yes. Like, have you internalized a belief that's not true, and then that creates your emotion? And so, you know, that book, coupled with the information that you're bringing to us, just really seems to reinforce how important our thoughts are. And you know, the good thing is, with practice, like you said, right, it takes practice, but with practice, we can start to build up that muscle of mastery. And be aware and reflective of our own thoughts before they engender emotions, which may then engender behaviors that we didn't intend for.
Yeah, and I think, what is so important to keep in mind along with that is that, emotions are just a part of being human. Mm-hmm. And it's not just women. We're not the only ones that have emotions. And that, because I would say 90% of my clients are men. And you'd probably be shocked at what emotional beings they really are. And so it's just recognizing that it's also part of being human to have a belief system. And, it's like that graphic that I shared about how our beliefs are kind of the foundation of our thoughts and our attitudes and that kind of thing. And one of the, I always kind of tap into this too, especially with certain people, it may be tougher to have empathy than other people. And so it's recognizing that they have their whole life history, which brings them to the place that they are and today in relation with you, and all of their experiences, the family they grew up in, it's part of who they are, just like yours is. And so as we, I'll say it's not even so much about getting older, but as we get more experience and with an intention to challenge our own fixed beliefs, we set ourselves up to be that more empathetic and open listener, because listening is kind of it's not a sub skill. It's so integral to every one of those 5 steps is your ability to be empathetic and to truly listen, to understand, as opposed to, like the statement on that one graphic was, as opposed to confirming what you already believe is true or judging the other person. And usually judging, I say judgy, when we're judgy, it's usually not a good thing. We're not usually saying, oh, look at how awesome that person looks. It's usually like, look at what she's wearing, but it's just recognizing that how we listen, almost like this whole body experience when we're listening to somebody, can make such a difference in terms of that energetic exchange. So thanks for sharing that. And also, if anybody's interested in learning more about conversational intelligence, there is a book. The woman who developed this whole body of knowledge, I studied under her. She just passed away, winter of 2019. But she's got a fantastic book, and there's a lot of resources out there if you want to learn more about that. And I'm always happy to come back and talk more about that. Let's look at these 3 tips too. Thanks for sharing, Jenny. She put a link in for the book. So these 3 tips that I'm going to share are all so related and such a big part of being more masterful in handling any kind of communication, but in particular, difficult communication. And so first is recognizing that the greatest threat to effective communication is most likely the absence of trust. And so let's take a look at, what does trust really mean, at least within this conversational intelligence framework. So trust is transparent, relationship focused before task. It's about understanding. It's about shared success. And we test assumptions and tell the truth. So transparency calms fears and uncertainty. It gives the information that people need in order to understand what is going on at the time that they need it. Because this is something that I see like unbelievably often with next generation professionals, is their sense of a lack of transparency from the leaders that they report to, or in the organizations that they work in. Relationship is about you listening with a desire to connect and understand. Understanding is about listening with empathy and intention to bridge connection and create that shared or mutual sense of what success is. Shared success is listening with intention to co-create strategies for mutual success. It's authentically valuing shared success and what I think of as true win-win. And then last is test assumptions and tell the truth. This is so important. And again, this is a huge missing piece of the puzzle for a lot of people. And this is kind of part of that step 4, where you're listening to understand where are the gaps between what I see as my reality and the other person's reality. It's ask questions and listen to establish what those differences are. And then it's also about being candid and kind. When you test your assumptions by asking questions and you're also candid, you avoid surprises, allow follow-up for concerns to be voiced, and it creates expectations that can be carried out. And so, again, it's like a lot of that is, there's a deeper dive into this in the book, and I could do a whole presentation just on this, but we'll move on to the next one. Oh, actually, I was just going to share this quote. I still really appreciate Stephen Covey's work and the fact that trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's a foundational principle that holds all relationships. So important. Let's move forward to this next one. So here's the other thing that I think can be really powerful, and just to reinforce this idea of being more open and connecting your intention and impact, is recognizing that we all have conversational blind spots. I've always loved this image where these are blind people all touching a different part of the elephant, and based on what part they touched, they had a different perspective. And oftentimes, especially in what I'll call difficult relationships, we can have very, very established blind spots when we're communicating with particular people. You see this a lot, even communicating with your parents, and so in family dynamics, you see this a lot. So it's the assuming everyone thinks like me, misunderstanding the impact of feelings or discounting the impact of feelings, lacking empathy for a particular person because maybe you just don't like them, they're not your cup of tea, but it can be felt. And it also kind of blinds your own ability to see what's true and not true. Believing that your memory is the truth or reality, when in reality, it's really more just whatever your perception or interpretation was. And then it's listening without checking understanding or testing assumptions. Any one of these blind spots can derail our conversations and block real shared understanding. Let's move to the last one here. So the third tip is to really almost like commit to yourself that you will actively practice active listening. So actively practice active listening, because active listening is truly your conversational superpower. And, this is a pretty simplistic graphic, but it can be this simple. You ask questions, and I would say targeted questions for sure, but open-ended is what's most important, that you ask those open-ended clarifying questions, that you consciously repeat in your own mind what it is that's being said and communicating. You pay attention. If possible, you're making eye contact and repeating what the other person said. You don't have to state it word for word. It's actually more effective to share how you heard it. And so it may seem like it just takes a long time or it will make conversations longer, but I promise that with practice comes mastery, and it can be just your way of showing up. And even if the other person is not committed to the same, I am a big believer that there's still benefits that you will appreciate and enjoy if you show up in this way, because it is a key. I say here that it's a conversational superpower for anybody who aspires to being a leader. It's essential, this ability to be an active listener, because the reality is that there's a lot of leaders, business owners out there, they're crappy at this. Can I say that? They're crappy at this. And so what if, or what's possible if you're actually really gifted at this because you practice? It's an amazing opportunity to show up and really be a leader, no matter whether you're still in school, new in your career, or you're an established professional. There's always opportunity to practice this. So let's go to the final slide. And I'm going to challenge everybody to put in the chat what's a takeaway that you'll practice this week. Just one thing. You can't really practice 100 things or 20 things, but what's one thing you might practice this week? Or if you feel like it, just unmute and just share with the group. We're such a small group here. Thank you, Crystal. She's going to work on active listening. Thank you, Jenny. Clarifying questions with the close of a conversation. Julie, checking your assumptions at the door. Yes. And Elizabeth is active listening. Sadie, practice trying to avoid conversational blind spots. Kaylee, understanding the impact of my intentions. Fantastic. So, Emily, I think there's one more slide. And that's just I think of this as name it and claim it. And so you've shared it in the chat. And now it's like, think about, will you put it on a Post-it? Will you put it in your phone? It's like, what do you need to set yourself up for success this week? And with that, I will turn it back over to Emily.
Thank you so much, Lori. Let me see. Are y'all still seeing my screen being shared?
No.
No. Okay. Thank you. I couldn't enter it in the chat, but my takeaway is not coming from a place of self-protection in conversations. I think especially when I feel busy, it's not defensive, but it can definitely be more protective as opposed to collaborative. So that's my takeaway. I just wanted to thank you so much, Lori. I always find you to be so measured and insightful, and it does not surprise me in the least that you lead a successful succession company. So I just appreciate you so much, and thank you guys for joining. Julie, I didn't get to say hi to you earlier. Hello, friend. But thank you guys so much, and I think we're ready now to go back into the sessions. I believe it's the I Am Remarkable session next for 1:30. So Lori, thank you again so much, friend. It is always a pleasure.
Thank you. Nice to meet everybody.